After World War II, Europe was facing a massive housing crisis. Cities had been destroyed, populations were growing, and architecture had to respond fast. But Le Corbusier was searching for an entirely new way of living. He never waited for a client's commission. For every crisis, he already had a project for traffic, for housing, for the city, for everyday life. He wanted to reinvent the street. He wanted to place the entire city inside a single building, and the result of those ideas became a project called Unité d'Habitation Marseille, a building that is both one of the most important works in the history of modern architecture and one of its most controversial.
The Unité d'Habitation Marseille was built between 1947 and 1952. During a period when France was facing a severe post-war housing shortage. But Le Corbusier did not see this project as merely a residential complex.
For years, he had been theorizing about the modern city and modern man. And now, for the first time, he had the opportunity to materialize those ideas at full scale. That is why the Unité d'Habitation Marseille is not just a building, it is a built manifesto. This project marks the moment when Le Corbusier attempted to compress all of his ideas about the city, collective living, and modern architecture into a single work. And that is precisely why the project feels both inspiring and frightening at the same time. Le Corbusier believed that the traditional European city no longer worked. Dense streets, lack of sunlight, overcrowding, and urban chaos were, to him, symptoms of a failed urban model. His solution was what we now call the vertical city. Instead of endless horizontal expansion, the population would be concentrated vertically, allowing the ground to remain open and free. That is why the Unité d'Habitation Marseille is elevated on pilotis. The ground plane is liberated. Air and light move freely beneath the structure, and the apartments no longer face dark and narrow streets. But more importantly, Le Corbusier no longer saw architecture as merely a building. He wanted architecture to perform as a city. That is why the project contains far more than housing units. Shops, restaurants, laundries, a hair salon, kindergarten, gymnasium, and communal spaces are all integrated within the structure itself. It feels as if a fragment of the city has been lifted off the ground and inserted into a massive concrete volume. Even the columns are more than structural elements. Le Corbusier pulls the columns away from the facade to free the exterior skin, while parts of the building's infrastructure and mechanical systems run through the columns themselves. In other words, even the columns becomes urban infrastructure. This vision reaches its peak on the rooftop. When we look at the rooftop of the Unité d'Habitation Marseille, it feels less like the top of a building and more like a fragment of the city itself. A kindergarten, gymnasium, children's pool, and communal spaces are all placed on the roof. In the traditional city, reaching these programs required moving through urban space. Now all you need to do is take the elevator. For Le Corbusier, the rooftop became a second ground. It feels as though he designed an entirely separate architectural project just for the roof.
This is where architecture enters into direct competition with the city itself. Le Corbusier is asking, if we can place all urban functions inside a single building, do we still need the traditional city at all? And that question still exists in contemporary architecture today.
At the Unité d'Habitation Marseille, we are confronted with a giant box, a massive shell containing both residential units and collective services. Decades later, MVRDV would continue a similar idea in the Market Hall project. But there is one important difference. In Marseille, the services are primarily designed for the residents of the building itself. In Market Hall, however, the public space directly merges with the city. The boundary between building and urban space is almost entirely dissolved. Another key idea of the project is the duplex apartment design. Le Corbusier wanted every unit to receive both northern and southern light. That is why the internal corridor is positioned at the center of the building, allowing each apartment to open to both sides. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the project is the way the units are inserted into the structural frame. If we study Le Corbusier's maquettes, we realize that he saw the building as a modular system. He famously described the apartments as bottles placed inside a wine rack. First comes the structural grid, and then the units slide into it like drawers. This idea later had a major influence on the Japanese metabolists, architects who imagined buildings as living organisms, capable of growth and transformation. It is almost as if Le Corbusier dreamed that architecture could function like Lego, constantly reassembled and recomposed.
One of the project's most famous ideas is its internal corridors. Le Corbusier called them streets in the sky. His goal was to recreate the social quality of the urban street within the building itself.
But this is precisely where the gap between idea and reality becomes visible. Because a real street is not merely a circulation path. A real street is full of diversity, noise, movement, and unpredictable encounters. The corridors of the Unité d'Habitation Marseille, however, were uniform and highly controlled. As a result, they never truly reproduce the qualities of an actual city street. And perhaps this is the project's most important criticism. Architecture can design space, but it cannot, by itself, produce social relationships.
Before Le Corbusier became a famous architect, he was a painter, and that painterly way of seeing later entered his architecture.
In his paintings, forms become simplified and geometric, while compositions are carefully controlled and organized through proportion and order. In the Unité d'Habitation Marseille, the facade is not merely a building envelope. The balconies are arranged like colorful squares and rectangles. The repetition of modules creates a rhythmic composition, and the colors give the building a graphic quality. This becomes even more evident on the rooftop. Ventilation towers, chimneys, and walls take on an almost sculptural presence. Some critics have even argued that the rooftop resembles a theatrical stage set or a three-dimensional painting, more than a purely functional architectural space. The Unité d'Habitation Marseille was intended as a housing solution for the working and middle classes, but the project became extremely expensive. Complex concrete construction, custom detailing, and advanced building techniques dramatically increased the cost. And this became one of the project's central contradictions. Le Corbusier famously said, "A house is a machine for living in." And perhaps no project explains that statement better than the Unité d'Habitation Marseille, a building that, like a complex machine, attempts to coordinate every aspect of daily life.
The Unité d'Habitation Marseille is a project that is at the same time a success and a failure. A success in terms of spatial innovational, architectural experimentation, and historical influence, and deeply problematic in social, economic, and even urban terms. But perhaps that is exactly why the project remains important. It demonstrated that architecture can create extraordinary spatial qualities, can propose entirely new version of the city, and can even reshape the way people live. But it cannot, on its own, create an ideal society.